Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Ron Paul Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, who's the Executive Director of the Institute for Peace and Prosperity. Daniel, nice to see you this morning.
Thank you. Good to be back.
Good. I want to talk a little bit more about an issue we've talked about several times already, and that has to do with the Patriot Act. It still hasn't been resolved, but something big happened just within the last 2 days, and that is the announcement and the ruling by the 6th Circuit Court of Appeals in New York that believe it or not, what our government is doing on this mass surveillance is not legal. But this is a technicality I want to sort out a little bit because, illegalities and constitutionality are two different things. And what they have said from my viewpoint is that the Patriot Act never gave the authority to the president, whether it was Bush or Obama, to have this mass surveillance. So it's an illegal program, according to what the courts have said. But they're more or less going to sit back and see what happens. It's going to fade out on June 1st if the Congress doesn't do anything. So it's up to Congress, to do something. And I find something very interesting. It's up to the wire again. Emergency. We have to do something. And Senator McConnell is coming to the rescue. He says, this is serious. We can't let this happen. And we can't do it in too big a hurry because we have to have a full debate. And his idea is have a temporary extension of the Patriot Act and all these authorities that are already in the Patriot Act.
So a month or?
Yeah, his temporary extension is 5 years. So do you think that's going to solve our problem?
It is interesting, isn't it? It's just how the Patriot Act was passed in the first place. You create a frenzy, you create these deadlines you've got to meet. I mean, Congress always does that? The debt ceiling?
That's the way Congress operates, and because they're out of control. And the biggest thing is they're out of money, and they can't afford this, and that's why they have to fuss and fume. And they know they're going to have to borrow money, but nobody gives up anything. I mean, even our conservatives right now, they're beating the bushes to cut spending, except for the military. They want to increase the military. So that's the problem that we have. The whole thing is you're absolutely right. They have to have the hysteria. You have to have the demagogues out there and the warmongers. But, this ruling has some good points to it. In spite of its shortcoming, it has some good points because there is a setback for the neocons. It's a setback for, Rubio and Cruz, who's pushing for all this stuff, a setback for a Bill Kristol and Senator Graham and Senator McCain. So these are setbacks because they love this stuff. But it's up for grabs right now. This is not going to be easily settled. And because it's a temporary victory, we shouldn't sit back and say, this is fine. But I think the greatest victory is for Ed Snowden. Mm-hmm. Because, this gives him a breather. And, if he isn't breaking the law, he's telling the truth of the government doing something illegal, which they're saying, he obviously is what we call him, a hero.
And a whistleblower, absolutely.
And a whistleblower, and he should come home. I don't know why, I don't know the technicalities of this. Why shouldn't he be given immunity? Come back and testify to the American people because Congress won't listen to him.
Well, we wouldn't have even known about this even to this day if it hadn't been for some of these revelations that's come from him and a couple of other whistleblowers.
Right, but he's charged with treason and all these horrible things, and the people won't allow him to come back, at least our government officials. But he's the one that's the bad guy. But what about Alexander, the former NSA director? Now we have Clapper. They've admitted they told lies to Congress on this. Oh, even when they knew they were breaking the law, they had to lie. Or they say, oh, yeah, we spy on you. And they knew they were breaking the law. So they say, we didn't do it. And they've even apologized at this. So here we have the director of NSA. He breaks the law, and then he tells lies, and he becomes, not guilty of anything. I would think that he ought to be fired or something by now.
Didn't he say something about why he couldn't stop it even though he knew it was wrong? Or what was his rationale?
Alexander said this once that when he was still chairman and several years ago, he knew it was illegal and he wanted to stop it. But his explanation, it's just so typical of the demagogue. He says, I was afraid that the people would resent it because they would look at it and somebody would demagogue it and say, oh, now you made it dangerous. And if something would have happened, he would have been to blame. So he says it was much, in his viewpoint, it was much too dangerous to stop the spying, illegal spying. But why doesn't he ask himself the question, well, is it dangerous to continue the spying? Yeah. Guess what we do to ourselves, Al-Qaeda could never do to us. The undermining of our liberties, and, and the destruction of individuals like Ed Snowden, and the destruction of the system. So I would say that they ought to look to find out who the greatest danger is.
But here's the funny thing, you mentioned Snowden and what they do. About Snowden's revelations, that we have to thank for this. Michael Morrell, who was the deputy director of the CIA, just wrote his tell-all book. And in the book, it came out yesterday, I think it was, that basically he blames Snowden for the rise of ISIS. So it wasn't our intervention, it wasn't attacking Iraq, it wasn't the chaos, it was all Snowden. He said, this is a quote from his book, ISIS was one of those terrorist groups that learned from Snowden, and it's clear that his actions played a role in the rise of ISIS.
Right, sure.
So that's a good way of saying that, hey, don't blame us. It's not our fault that we didn't get it. He also said something else interesting that's related to this. He said we expected these liberations in the Middle East would undermine Al-Qaeda. We were surprised that they seemed to bolster them. Right. So this is how he gets off the hook, is to blame everything on Snowden.
This whole idea about the chairman of the director of the NSA can lie and apologize and get away with it. But, it seems like in law there's sometimes something called contempt. Of course, the contempt of Congress is a controversy. But I think there is a lot of contempt here. I think it's contempt for the American people. It's a contempt for freedom itself, and they should be held accountable. But the other issue that I barely mentioned, I wanted to talk about a little bit more about legality versus constitutionality. Now, I understand this ruling just dealt with whether or not the government got authority from the Patriot Act to spy on us. And that's all they said. And they said they did not. They didn't say it was unconstitutional and therefore it should quit. They just said that it wasn't clear enough. So the temptation is to maybe just clarify the language in a wrong fashion.
And I think there's a danger because it is sort of a good news story. And yesterday, of course, everyone was happy, and we should be somewhat cheered because it's a kind of a psychological or propaganda victory. But there is a danger that now people will feel that it's settled. And everything is settled, and we've had a victory, and it's over, whereas I think this is just the beginning.
Well, the ACLU filed this case, and they actually didn't even get their case addressed because they said it was an attack on our privacy and our rights. They did not address that. They addressed this technicality as if, but in a way, what it does is confirms that if they fix this technicality, then it becomes legal, and you've just amended the Constitution.
Yeah.
So they're avoiding this. So the odds of us, maybe someday it'll get there, but even with these minor victories, which we can cheer on, but the major victory has to come when we have not only one or two people around and search for them in the different courts and have more than 5 or 10 in the Congress, but we have to raise up a generation of people who understand what liberty is all about and the attempt the founders made to have a government that protected liberty and not this whole idea of making us safe. Here this NSA director says, my whole purpose is making you safe. Well, what else would he justify? Oh, some people might get hurt. I'm going to make you safe, so I'm going to put you in a concentration camp. Yeah. I guess that's what they did with Japanese.
Yeah, exactly.
We wanted to make. They didn't say that we thought you. They didn't argue that we thought they were going to join the Japanese. They said we got to put you there because you're safe and protect you from the American people. It's always protection. Actually, the Nazis used that same argument too.
Exactly. The other thing that, in addition to being aware of liberty, is to watch out for government tricks. Because I've already seen from some of the supporters of the McConnell approach that this ruling just makes it much more important to reform the Patriot Act, and we know what the word reform means.
I wouldn't be surprised if McConnell's bill gets tinkered with a little bit with regard to this and just writes a clear-cut legalization of this type of surveillance of the American people.
In nice language.
Oh yeah, it does sound good, but something that the courts might accept, and then maybe in 5 years from now, if we're lucky, somebody might get a court case going. You know, this, I don't know how long ago the ACLU, you know, filed their suit, but these things take a long, long time. And just think the simple solution is if you could raise up a generation of people who could read and understand the Constitution. I mean, they can read and they can understand the Constitution, but I think the problem is they ignore it and they learn how to get around it, and they dream up all kinds of interpretations and reverse it all. You know, for instance, the courts or the liberals right now say that governments can do, the federal government can do anything it wants unless it's prohibited by the Constitution. Yeah. So they turn the Constitution on its head. They're supposed to be restricted to only those functions that are given to the federal government. So, but when you have that attitude built into a society, it's going to take a long time. The big question is, how bad does this get, and how angry do people get? I mean, we already see the expression of anger with overreaction in our cities, and an economy that's in shambles, and a monetary system that's based on fraud. So I think we're in for some tough times, but let's cheer this on a bit. Let's hope that they wake up and say, hey, maybe we better back off on Ed Snowden. Wouldn't it be neat to have a parade for Ed Snowden? You know, but I'm I guess, stretching my hopes on that one.
You never know.
Well, anyway, I'd like to thank everybody today for tuning in to the Liberty Report, and come back soon.